In every corner of our planet, a delicate balance exists: creation and destruction. Hurricanes and cyclones, born over warm oceans, are nature's most powerful forces. They awe, devastate, and remind us of our vulnerability. Let's journey into the heart of the storm. In the late summer of 2005, the warm, languid waters of the Gulf of Mexico began to stir. A tropical depression, seemingly innocuous at first, was feeding on the immense thermal energy of the sea, beginning a process of terrifying intensification. This was the genesis of a storm that would soon sear itself into the collective memory of a nation, Hurricane Katrina. As it grew, its structure became more defined. Its eye, a deceptively calm vortex at the heart of a maelstrom of spiraling winds and torrential rain, a monstrous engine of destruction charting a course towards the American Gulf Coast. The city of New Orleans, a vibrant jewel of culture and history, lay directly in its path. Built in a precarious bowl, much of it below sea level, its existence had always been a gamble against the forces of water, held in check by a complex but aging system of levees and floodwalls. For days, the warnings grew more dire. Meteorologists watched with growing dread as Katrina swelled into a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane, one of the most powerful ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin. The predictions were apocalyptic, speaking of a storm surge that could overwhelm the city's defenses entirely. The evacuation orders were issued, leading to a frantic, chaotic exodus. Highways became parking lots as hundreds of thousands attempted to flee the impending disaster. But for many, escape was not an option. The city's most vulnerable populations, the elderly, the impoverished, those without transportation, were left behind, seeking refuge in designated shelters like the Superdome, or simply hunkering down in their homes, praying for deliverance from the approaching fury. They were trapped, waiting for a storm that promised to be unlike any they had ever known. On the morning of August 29th, Katrina made landfall. The initial assault was one of terrifying winds that tore roofs from houses and turned everyday objects into deadly projectiles. The sound was a deafening, ceaseless roar, a symphony of destruction that seemed to signal the end of the world. But the wind was only the beginning. The true catastrophe was yet to unfold, as the storm's colossal surge began to push against the city's fragile defenses, testing them to their absolute breaking point and beyond, promising to unleash the Gulf itself upon the sleeping city. The levees, the very structures designed to protect New Orleans from the water that surrounded it, failed. Not in one place, but in over 50 locations across the city. The breaches were catastrophic. A torrent of murky, churning floodwater poured into the low-lying neighborhoods, a relentless brown tide that consumed everything in its path. It was not a gradual rise, but a violent inundation. Streets became raging rivers, sweeping away cars, homes and lives with indiscriminate force. Within hours, 80% of the city was submerged, transforming a modern American metropolis into a desolate, toxic lake. The human cost was staggering and immediate. People who had sought refuge in their attics found themselves trapped by the rising waters, with no means of escape. The scenes that followed were ones of pure desperation, broadcast to a stunned world. Survivors clung to rooftops, waving makeshift flags, their pleas for help echoing across the flooded landscape. The Louisiana Superdome, intended as a shelter of last resort, descended into a scene of chaos and squalor, lacking power, water, and basic sanitation for the tens of thousands crammed inside. It became a symbol of the institutional failure that was unfolding. In the days that followed, the official response was tragically slow and woefully inadequate. Critical resources and personnel were delayed, mired in bureaucratic confusion, while the citizens of New Orleans suffered. The images of neglect and despair painted a portrait of a profound societal breakdown, exposing deep-seated issues of race and class. The final official death toll would be recorded at over 1,800 people, but the true scope of the loss, of lives, of homes, of a way of life, was immeasurable. It was a wound inflicted not just by a storm, but by human failure. The displacement was on a scale not seen in the United States since the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Over 1 million people were forced from their homes along the Gulf Coast, scattered across the country to become refugees in their own land. Many would never return. Hurricane Katrina did more than just flood a city. It laid bare the fragility of our infrastructure, the shortcomings of our disaster preparedness, and the deep social inequalities that can turn a natural disaster into a man-made catastrophe of epic proportions. In the spring of 2008, Another monstrous vortex began to churn in the warm waters of the Bay of Bengal. This storm, given the name Nargis, tracked slowly but menacingly towards the coast of Myanmar, a nation then largely isolated from the outside world by a reclusive military junta. While international meteorological agencies issued increasingly urgent warnings about the cyclone's power and its projected path, these alerts struggled to penetrate the state-controlled media, leaving millions of people perilously unaware of the cataclysm that was bearing down upon them. Nargis was a storm of immense destructive potential. As it approached the coast, it intensified rapidly, its winds howling with lethal force. Its primary target was the Irrawaddy Delta, a vast, low-lying and densely populated region that serves as Myanmar's agricultural heartland. This delta is a labyrinth of rivers, tributaries, and coastal inlets, a landscape exquisitely vulnerable to the kind of storm surge that Nargis was about to unleash. The people here, living in simple homes made of bamboo and thatch, had little to no protection against such a force. On the 2nd of May, Cyclone Nargis made landfall. It struck the delta not with a glancing blow but with the full direct force of its eye wall. The winds, estimated at over 215 kilometers per hour, acted like a giant scythe, flattening entire villages in an instant. But as with Katrina, the most devastating weapon was the water. A colossal storm surge, reportedly as high as 12 feet, swept miles inland, a wall of seawater that surged up the rivers and estuaries, consuming the flat, defenseless landscape with unimaginable speed and violence. There was nowhere to run. The surge moved faster than a person could flee, erasing everything in its path. Homes, schools, monasteries, and entire communities simply vanished beneath the churning, debris-filled water. The delta, a place of life and cultivation, was transformed into a horrifying seascape of death and destruction. For the people of the Irrawaddy, there was no warning, no escape, and no defense. They were caught in a perfect storm of meteorological fury and crippling human isolation, a silent tragedy unfolding far from the world's gaze. The immediate aftermath of Cyclone Nargis was a scene of apocalyptic devastation. The landscape was unrecognizable, littered with the debris of shattered lives and the bodies of the dead. The official death toll, initially downplayed by the government, would eventually be confirmed at a horrifying 138,000 people, with tens of thousands more simply listed as missing, their bodies likely washed out to sea or buried in the mud. It was one of the deadliest cyclones in recorded history, a demographic catastrophe that wiped out a significant portion of the delta's population. The survivors were left with nothing. An estimated 2.5 million people were severely affected, their homes destroyed, their rice paddies inundated with salt water, and their sources of food and clean drinking water completely obliterated. They were left homeless, starving, and surrounded by disease in a waterlogged wasteland. The scale of the humanitarian crisis was almost beyond comprehension, a desperate situation that demanded an immediate and massive international response to prevent an even greater loss of life from starvation and disease. Yet, in a move that shocked and horrified the international community, Myanmar's ruling military junta initially refused to allow foreign aid and disaster relief experts into the country. Driven by paranoia and a deep-seated distrust of the outside world, the government severely restricted access, leaving its own people to suffer. Aid shipments were blocked, visas for experienced aid workers were denied, and offers of assistance were rebuffed. This political intransigence compounded the natural disaster, turning a crisis into a catastrophe of neglect. Eventually, under immense international pressure, the regime slowly relented, but the delays proved fatal for many. The inadequate and obstructed response meant that for weeks, survivors were left to fend for themselves, battling hunger, dehydration, and waterborne diseases like cholera. Cyclone Nargis stands as a chilling example of how political isolation and poor governance can exacerbate the toll of a natural disaster, creating a tragedy where the suffering inflicted by the storm was cruelly and needlessly prolonged by the actions of those in power. In late summer 2017, a tropical wave in the Gulf of Mexico quietly gathered strength, destined to become Hurricane Harvey. Harvey rapidly intensified, fueled by warm waters, transforming into a Category 4 hurricane. But Harvey's true danger was its slow crawl, stalling over Texas and unleashing catastrophic, record-breaking floods. Hurricane Harvey unleashed a torrent over Texas, transforming Houston into a submerged city. Streets vanished beneath a murky sea with over 60 inches of rain recorded. Families retreated to rooftops marooned by rising waters. The Cajun Navy navigated debris-filled waters, rescuing neighbors. As waters receded, a landscape of ruin emerged, revealing the devastation. In the vast western Pacific, a storm of mythical intensity was born. This was Typhoon Haiyan, known locally as Yolanda. Haiyan became one of the most powerful cyclones ever recorded. The storm surge arrived with tsunami-like force, devastating communities. Typhoon Haiyan's storm surge hit Tacloban like an inland tsunami, 20 feet high, surging miles inland, sweeping away families and homes in minutes. When the water receded, Tacloban was left a wasteland, rubble, mud, and loss everywhere. Aid poured in, but Haiyan's devastation remains a stark warning of our vulnerability to ever-stronger storms. In late 2012, Hurricane Sandy formed over the Caribbean, but instead of weakening, it merged with a winter storm, creating a massive hybrid superstorm. Sandy's wind field stretched over 1,000 miles, threatening more than 20 states. The real danger was the record-breaking storm surge, flooding New York and exposing vulnerabilities like never before. Hurricane Sandy's storm surge overwhelmed New York, flooding streets, subways, and neighborhoods. A power station explosion plunged Manhattan into darkness, turning the city into a silent, eerie landscape. Coastal communities were devastated, homes destroyed, and lives shattered. Sandy was a wake-up call, showing the urgent need for stronger coastal defenses and disaster preparedness. In the vast warm waters of the Bay of Bengal, a new power was stirring. This was the genesis of the Bola cyclone. It gathered strength, spinning into a colossal storm, its path aimed at the vulnerable Ganges Delta. The sky turned ominous, the air thick with dread. The true weapon was the storm surge, a liquid battering ram, poised to erase everything in its path. The Bola cyclone struck with unimaginable force, unleashing a deadly surge that obliterated villages and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Survivors faced utter devastation, no food, no shelter, and poisoned farmlands. The tragedy exposed deep political rifts, fueling the movement for Bangladesh's independence. In August 1992, a quiet Atlantic season erupted as Hurricane Andrew formed, rapidly intensifying into a compact, ferocious monster. On August 24th, Andrew struck South Florida with 175 miles per hour winds, tearing homes from foundations and leaving devastation in its wake. By sunrise, entire neighborhoods were gone, reduced to rubble, a stark testament to nature's awesome power. Hurricane Andrew was a brutal wake-up call, causing over $27 billion in damage and exposing failures in disaster response and building codes. The devastation led to a complete overhaul of FEMA and stricter building standards, making South Florida a model for resilience against nature's fury. In December 1974, Darwin was preparing for Christmas, unaware of the looming threat. Cyclone Tracy formed, initially expected to bypass the city, but on Christmas Eve it struck with catastrophic force. The city plunged into darkness with only lightning illuminating the chaos. By Christmas morning, Darwin lay in ruins, erased by the storm. On Christmas Day 1974, Cyclone Tracy left Darwin in ruins, homes destroyed, streets choked with debris, and the city cut off from the world. But from devastation came resilience. Today, Darwin stands rebuilt, its foundations shaped by the lessons of Tracy, a city reborn stronger than ever. In 2005, as the wounds of Katrina were still raw, the Atlantic spawned another monster, Hurricane Rita. Born over warm waters, Rita rapidly intensified into a Category 5 hurricane, threatening the Gulf Coast. With memories of disaster fresh, millions fled in one of the largest evacuations in U.S. history. On September 24, 2005, Hurricane Rita made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. It slammed into the Texas-Louisiana border, unleashing wind and water. The storm surge inundated communities, submerging homes and businesses. Rita's passage left a trail of ruin, highlighting vulnerability. Lessons from Rita and Katrina spurred changes in disaster protocols. When we look back upon these immense atmospheric events, Katrina, Nargis, Harvey, Haiyan, and all the others, we're not merely recounting stories of wind and rain. We're bearing witness to a collective legacy, a series of profound scars etched upon both the human and natural world. Each storm, a unique entity with its own character and trajectory, contributed to a global tapestry of loss. The sheer scale of the combined impact is almost beyond comprehension. Millions upon millions of lives were irrevocably altered, homes swept away, livelihoods destroyed, and entire communities erased from the map, leaving behind a silence where life once thrived. The physical devastation is honestly staggering. Consider the cumulative effect on our coastlines, from the bayous of Louisiana, permanently altered by Katrina's surge, to the pulverized shores of the Philippines after Haiyan. These storms have reshaped geography itself. They have accelerated coastal erosion, destroyed vital mangrove forests and coral reefs that serve as natural barriers, and contaminated freshwater sources with saltwater intrusion. The very ecosystems that nurture and protect coastal populations have been degraded, a critical blow that increases vulnerability to future events, creating a perilous feedback loop of destruction and diminished resilience. Beyond the immediate, visible destruction, these disasters leave behind a quieter, more insidious form of damage. The economic toll is monumental, running into the hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars. This is a cost borne not just by governments and insurance companies, but by ordinary families who lose everything. The disruption to agriculture, fishing, and industry can cripple regional economies for years, sometimes decades. This economic devastation exacerbates poverty and inequality, creating a long tail of suffering that persists long after the floodwaters have receded and the winds have died down, a burden passed down through generations. And then there are the invisible scars, the psychological wounds carried by the survivors. The trauma of witnessing such overwhelming destruction, of losing loved ones, of being displaced from one's home, leaves a lasting impact on the human spirit. Anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress are common in the wake of these events. This collective trauma hangs over communities, a shadow that touches every aspect of life. Rebuilding homes and infrastructure is a tangible task, but healing the profound psychological damage inflicted upon millions is a far more complex and enduring challenge for humanity. This litany of tragic storms serves as a powerful and increasingly urgent global summons. It is a call to action that we can no longer afford to ignore. The sheer repetition of these catastrophes, their increasing intensity, and their widening geographical reach all point to a fundamental truth. Our relationship with the planet's climate system is changing. These are not merely isolated acts of nature, they're symptoms of a larger systemic shift. The collective impact of these disasters underscores a stark imperative, the critical, non-negotiable need for us to adapt, to prepare, and to build resilience on a global scale. The lessons are written in the debris of shattered cities and the stories of displaced populations. We have learned that early warning systems, while crucial, are not enough. We must also invest in robust, accessible evacuation plans that protect the most vulnerable members of society. We've seen how inadequate building codes and poorly planned coastal development can turn a powerful storm into a human catastrophe. The imperative, therefore, is to rethink how and where we build, integrating the knowledge of risk into the very fabric of our urban and coastal planning for the future. Resilience is not merely about bouncing back. It is about bouncing forward. It means constructing stronger, more intelligent infrastructure, seawalls, floodgates, and reinforced buildings. But it also means embracing nature-based solutions, restoring mangrove forests, protecting coral reefs, and preserving coastal wetlands are not just acts of environmental conservation. They're vital investments in our collective safety. These natural systems are our first and most effective line of defense, capable of absorbing storm surge and mitigating wind damage in ways that concrete and steel alone cannot. Ultimately, the collective legacy of these storms is a profound reminder of our interconnectedness. A storm that devastates Myanmar or the Philippines sends ripples across the global community, prompting humanitarian responses and economic adjustments. This shared vulnerability demands shared responsibility. The path forward requires unprecedented international cooperation, the sharing of technology and resources, and a unified commitment to mitigating the drivers of climate change. The imperative is clear. We must learn from the tragedies of the past to forge a safer, more resilient future for all who inhabit these vulnerable shores. Hurricanes remind us of nature's unyielding power and our vulnerability. Yet, in the aftermath, we witness the resilience of the human spirit, neighbors helping neighbors, communities rebuilding, forging a stronger future together. Stay safe, stay curious, and stay informed.